Welcome back now to the ongoing war or proxy war in Ukraine. The Biden regime has once again invested a large amount of your money into Ukraine's never-ending war with Russia. Seriously, I guess until we get another president, this is just going to keep going for another year and a half. Biden approving his 40th military aid package for Ukraine. This one, $325 million, bringing the total U.S. aid, again, this is aid, to just over $40 billion since the beginning of the invasion back in 2022. Now, of course, when you add up the aid, the actual cash, and the equipment, yeah, it's well over 118, 120. I don't even know what the hell it's at anymore. It's ridiculous. This package includes key capabilities, we're told, to aid Ukraine's effort to retake its sovereign territory and to support Ukraine's air defense as they protect Ukrainian soldiers, civilians, and their infrastructure. This will also send them more artillery, anti-armor systems, ammunition, blah, 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 blah. The latest chunk of money came only 4 days, 4 days after a whopping $2.1 billion package of military support that they approved. As we continue to fund this proxy war, check this out. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, announcing yesterday that his country has begun receiving Russian tactical nuclear weapons and everything is ready, quote, for their deployment. Again, this is coming from Lukashenko. He's warning that he wouldn't hesitate to order their use if Belarus faces an act of aggression, which actually contradicts earlier statements by Putin, who said that Russian weapons would be deployed to Belarus next month and emphasized they would remain under Moscow's exclusive control. Earlier this year, Putin announcing the planned deployment of those short-range nukes to Moscow's neighbor in a move widely seen as a warning to us, the U.S., as we, of course, have been stepping up our military support and money and da-da-da. So, if the Belarus president is telling the truth, it would mark the first time Russia has moved some of their nukes beyond their borders since the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's a big deal, folks. So just how far and how much are we willing to go? How long are we going to continue this under the Biden regime? Here now for the latest on the war in Ukraine, retired Army Colonel and former advisor to the Secretary of Defense under Trump, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Doug, welcome back to the program. How about it? I mean, I hate to use the term never ending, but that's what it seems like. This is going to be never ending until we change the regime in Washington, D.C., I guess.
Well, everybody, I think, increasingly is looking forward to regime change in Washington, except the people that live in Washington. They're happy with the way things are. Once you leave this city and go anywhere else, you encounter a lot of unhappy Americans. Lukashenko is not in control of those weapons, regardless of whatever he says. The nuclear weapons are tactical nuclear weapons, 5 kilotons or less. Those are handled by Russian troops from the Russian armed forces, and it's very simple. The White Russians or Belarusians do not have forces trained to use those or maintain them or anything else. So, no, this is still under Moscow's control, and I think this was really at Lukashenko's request, who is very concerned that he could be a target of some regime change operation. We've already tried to remove him a couple of times with help from the National Endowment for Democracy or America's answer to the Communist International. We go into these countries, preach democracy, and then try to change the government. But as far as the war in Ukraine is going, the last 10 plus days have been devastating for Ukraine. Putin gave a presentation, a speech, and a 3-hour discussion with journalists about the war, and he cited some numbers. His numbers were actually low. He understated the damage, which is probably smart for him to do so. But we know that hundreds of tanks and several hundred artillery pieces and other armored fighting vehicles, thousands of Ukrainian troops. Current estimates are close to 15,000 dead. And we don't have any idea how many thousands are wounded, but we know the hospitals, the nearby evacuation areas are all full of wounded. So this has been nothing short of a disaster. They've made no progress at all. They've never reached the main defensive belt. All the fights have been on the periphery or just inside the security zone. And remember, just 20 to 25 kilometers in front of the defenses that Russia has built is this thing called the security zone. And that's where the Ukrainians have gotten, and that's where their offensive has ended.
Now, Colonel, those numbers you were just given, that's just in the last 10 days of this offensive, correct?
Yeah,
wow.
Yes.
Some big numbers.
When this first started, within the first 3, 4, 5 days, they lost 7,000 killed. And that's why now people are estimating more than twice that number are dead. Almost all of the tanks that are being destroyed, not all, but almost all, are Western manufacture. So we're seeing French, German, British equipment that's being destroyed on the battlefield. And again, in most cases, these tanks, all of this equipment is being destroyed by artillery. And it's largely because the Ukrainians attack into an area, they find themselves in a minefield, they try to get out of the minefield, and while they're stuck in the minefields, they're being annihilated. Then when they try to turn back to their lines, the Russians have already deployed aerial delivered mines behind them. So now they have to break through minefields behind them that didn't exist when they first attacked.
Is this the latest offensive?
This is a catastrophe.
Yeah. So my question then was going to be...
No, this is just
is that probably why that Biden then sent all this latest cash, is because of this last 10-day offensive where they've taken so many casualties and so much artillery, because we're looking at these numbers going, $325 million for direct aid, but then billions more for more equipment, artillery, ammunition, da-da-da. This has to be connected, right? They had such staggering losses. Here's some more money. Here's some more equipment.
Well, I'd say you're right normally. The only thing I would add is that there's this historic American strategy that says that if you're failing, go big. In other words, double down on the wrong course of action, reinforce failure, continue to dig the hole deeper until there's no way to get out of it. And I see that happening in Ukraine. The intelligent thing at this point would be to say, congratulations, Ukraine, you've done all that you can do. We have to be realistic now. We can't sacrifice the entire country and its population and have nothing left. So it's time to talk. But there's no evidence for that. I think we really are ready to fight this down to the last Ukrainian. And then, of course, there's always the danger as this collapses, as Ukraine collapses and everything falls apart, that there will be pressure for us to do something really stupid, which is intervene in Western Ukraine.
Right.
And I still would not exclude that as a possibility.
Yeah, that's probably where we're headed. Boots on the ground, another war that Americans don't want, and more of our young men and women killed for a war we don't need to be involved in my opinion. Colonel, let me ask you something. Tucker Carlson made some headlines this week for discussing why the huge attack and push to get Trump and to make sure he can never serve as commander-in-chief again. I want to play a short clip and get your reaction on the backside.
But because Joe Biden and his many allies, from Chuck Schumer to Mitch McConnell to Paul Ryan and every single news anchor on all of television, all of them believe that Ukraine, its borders, its future, its infrastructure are all more important than the town that you live in. They sincerely think that, and it's obvious. Everyone in power thinks that, except for Donald Trump. Whatever else you say about him, Trump is the one guy with an actual shot at becoming president who dissents from Washington's long-standing pointless war agenda. And for that one fact, they're trying to take Trump out before you can vote for him.
Is Tucker right, Colonel?
I don't think that I have much to add to what Tucker said. Tucker's absolutely spot on. It's funny, here in Washington, the left likes to joke, and for that matter, all of the rhinos that are with them, that Trump is the one guy we want to run against. Well, that's nonsense. They're deathly afraid that the man will run and that he will be swept back into office. Now, of course, that presupposes that we can have free and fair elections.
Right.
That's open to debate. Our electoral integrity is at an all-time low. But his point is valid. You know, the war is bound up with this administration. Remember, this is an administration that is waging war against Russia in Ukraine and at the same time waging war inside the United States against us.
Yeah, no kidding. Only a couple seconds left. My last question to you, totally separate from what's happening with Russia and China. And I think you wrote on this. We got the headline up there, guys. The U.S. is confirming that China now has a spy base in Cuba. I mean, they had police stations in our own country. They've been buying farmland. They fly balloons over us. And now they're spying on us from Cuba. Your reaction to this? Because we know the bought and paid for president, alleged guy, is not going to do anything against China. Your thoughts?
The Chinese are heavily engaged in Mexico, not just Cuba. Cuba has been a platform for anybody that is anti-American for a long time. If you go back to the 1930s when the Spanish Civil War was raging, they supported the communists in Spain, that is Mexico, Venezuela, and Cuba. Not much has changed. These countries are hostile to us. So they all offer the Chinese, Russians, anybody that they think could be hostile to us a home. And yes, they're operating freely in Cuba, but they're also operating very effectively in Mexico. And of the two right now, I would consider the presence in Mexico to be far more dangerous.
Well, I would agree with you because we already know that they're doing a Cold War against Americans by selling fentanyl so cheap to the cartels so it'll get into this country disguised as little colored pills and kill off millions of Americans. That's one of their Cold War tactics right there. Colonel, as always, we appreciate you so much, your insight and your honesty. Thank you, sir.
Sure, thank you.
Yep, take care.